Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story. Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm your host, Adam Ganucheau. Joining me today in the studio, we have a big crew. We don't usually have a crew this big. We like to keep it to 2 or 3 people usually, but this is a special day. We're going to talk about kind of a special instance that of public policy that I think a lot of people will be interested in, and we're going to treat it that way. But let me go around the table here in the studio and introduce everybody we've got with us today. To my right, Geoff Pender. Geoff, how's it going?
Hey, Adam.
To his right, Bobby Harrison. Bobby.
Hey, guys. How are y'all doing?
Doing fine. Taylor Vance, directly across from me. How you doing, Taylor?
Good.
And we are, if you listen to this podcast at all, you know the 4 of us. We're regular sort of guests and hosts of the show. But we are glad to be joined today for the first time ever on the other side, Sophia Paffenroth, who is our, newest healthcare reporter on staff at Mississippi Today. Sophia, welcome.
Hey, Adam. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see you, and thank you for being here. And we're going to get into this conversation. We have covered a lot of pretty, I think, substantial, life-altering for many people, life and death policies in the Capitol before. But the one that's before us this session, we've talked about it a good bit, but for today's episode, I really want to dwell on it, is Medicaid expansion. There is, for really the first time since the Affordable Care Act was passed, a real debate happening at the Mississippi State Capitol about the merits of expanding Medicaid. Of course, we know that expansion, we've seen these studies, we've covered them, we've heard from experts about them for more than a decade now about what expansion would do for Mississippi. I think first and foremost, it would cover around 200,000 Mississippians who currently don't have health insurance or coverage of any kind. At least 200,000, I would say, and we'll get into maybe some of those specifics. Hospitals, we have this rural hospital crisis where more than half of our rural hospitals are at risk of closure in the next 3 years because of financial concerns. They have been begging lawmakers for expansion because it's allowing us to draw down more than $1 billion each year in federal funds if we were to expand. So, first and foremost, you're helping people who need it in Mississippi, the unhealthiest state in America. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you're helping hospitals which need it in, a dire situation. So there are some other benefits to it. We may get into some of that. But Sophia, I'm going to start with you since you're new to the show, but you've also been really, I think, taking the lead for us in the Capitol this session in terms of covering this debate. Can you just tell us generally where lawmakers are? We're, near the end of February. We're getting close to that halfway point of the legislative session. Where are lawmakers today in this debate?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I will just start off by saying that this is my first legislative session in Mississippi. And it's been a really exciting first session.
Hell of a first session.
Right. Healthcare is so much at the forefront this year. And things have actually been moving pretty quickly, despite the fact that this is the start of a new term, and so it's a little bit longer, and things are usually a little bit slower moving.
Yeah.
But we had, for example, presumptive eligibility for pregnant women pass the full House 2 weeks ago. And I'm not sure that people necessarily expected it to happen so quickly.
Yeah.
It just feels like there's a lot of momentum. Obviously, we have Medicaid expansion. Everyone's talking about it. This past week, there were 2 expansion hearings that took place at the Capitol pretty much back-to-back on Tuesday and Wednesday, talking about the pros and cons of expansion. Several bills have been authored and put forward. The House Democrats bill was sort of a pragmatic bill that included a private care option. So It would cover people up to 200% of the federal poverty level, but they would also be paying premiums. So more people would be paying into the system, which is generally considered a little bit more pragmatic.
That's kind of taking into account some of the Republican talking points and
Right.
criticisms over the years about
Right.
what expansion would look like.
Right, exactly.
So House Democrats really did kind of think that one through pretty thoroughly.
Yeah. There is a Senate expansion bill authored by Kevin Blackwell. Right now, we don't totally know what that's going to look like or how it's going to develop. The bill is just really bringing forth code sections. But from what we've heard from the lieutenant governor, it would increase the eligibility threshold to 138% of the federal poverty level and would also include a work requirement and some kind of premiums.
Yeah, and that's important to say, or it's important to say on that one, that's a Republican-led effort. So
Right.
you've got the House Democrats who came out really first. I mean, Bobby, you've said this a lot. Senate Democrats had filed their own expansion bill too, early on in the session. Then House Democrats came out with the one you mentioned, Sophia, the very specific one that kind of, they tailored the crafting of it to sort of meet some of those Republican concerns that they had heard over the years. And now we've got Republicans in the Senate. Kevin Blackwell is the Republican chair of the Senate Medicaid Committee,
Right.
who is pushing this with the support of Republican Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann.
That's right.
And there's also a House Republican effort, right?
Yes, there is. Missy McGee, the chairwoman of House Medicaid, has been really outspoken about supporting increasing coverage for poor working class Mississippians. That bill has not dropped yet, but we're excited to see that one as well. And she organized the Tuesday hearing. It was a presentation from the Hilltop Institute, who actually put together this really comprehensive report and study on exactly what expansion would look like in Mississippi, and like the economic benefits of expansion. So she's been really leading that effort along with Jason White, the Speaker of the House.
Yeah. So you've got Taylor. I want to turn to you. I mean, we'll talk about the politics of this, but you've got the two Republican leaders on both sides of the building pushing seemingly their own separate, but maybe they'll look similar pretty quickly here, expansion plans. And that's the big difference, right, between this session and what's happened before. Like, Democrats have been proposing Medicaid expansion since, the ACA was passed.
Yeah.
And it's been completely ignored, completely brushed aside by Republican leaders. The difference this year is the politics. Talk about some of the politics in the building, Taylor.
Yeah, so I think as we all know, and as listeners of this podcast have heard us talk about before, the reason why this is possible is because the new House Speaker. This was really a non-starter with former Speaker Philip Gunn, and the recently elected Speaker Jason White is open and is pressing ahead with Medicaid expansion,
which was something he first told Geoff Pender here. September or October, August of last fall, which kind of shook the Jackson political ecosystem when Geoff wrote that story.
Yeah,
so.
Right. And you got to have the backing of usually both the speaker and the lieutenant governor to get some major policy over the finish line at the Capitol. And so both the lieutenant governor, both the speaker are at least on board with some version of expansion. And earlier this week, we had a tweet from Governor Tate Reeves, who said that he was still opposed to Medicaid expansion. I think some people were wondering if the governor was going to kind of have a Damascus conversion, but that hasn't happened. After spending $10 million plus on a statewide campaign opposing Medicaid expansion, he is still opposed to Medicaid expansion.
He had a really erudite detailed opposition statement about it, right?
That's right.
Medicaid sucks.
Medicaid sucks.
Or Obamacare sucks.
That was actually
He was quoting.
He was quoting.
It was a screenshot of former President Donald Trump saying Obamacare sucks, which is, since the ACA was passed under President Obama, that is what a lot of the opponents just derisively call it. But so I thought it was important to ask the Capitol leaders what they thought about it, and they didn't really seem to be deterred that much by the governor's tweet.
Really, at all.
At
seemingly,
all.
Yeah.
I thought Speaker White's response was pretty interesting. I just have it on my phone here. I'd like to read from it. His response was, well, my position's been pretty clear on the fact that we were going to explore and look at Medicaid as it affects hardworking, low-income Mississippians. My ideas and thoughts about that haven't changed. He's the duly elected governor, and he's certainly entitled to his opinions on the matter. I don't hold any of those against him. We maybe here in the House have a different view of it, which I think is a very polite way of saying, we don't really care. Thanks for your opinion, but we're going to do what we're going to do.
Yeah. I think also just something that has struck me about this is the big difference. Of course, the politics and sort of the Republican leadership that's pushing their own proposals through. But another thing that struck me about this session is that Democrats aren't far off at all from what Republicans have introduced to this point too. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the details, with the preface of these are moving. The process is moving. The legislative process is moving. By the time this episode airs or is 2 days old, we might know a lot more about some of the details of these plans. But for the most part, we've got basic Medicaid expansion, even from the Republicans that we've talked to or seen bills from so far. And that's kind of all Democrats ever wanted. I mean, they've been following that bill for years.
Yeah, it was. I guess it was about a year ago that Kevin Blackwell, the chair of the Medicaid committee in the Senate, told me that he did not support Medicaid expansion. That he might go along with some type of insurance, private insurance, to using Medicaid funds to pay for that private insurance, kind of what Arkansas has done. But now Sophia tells us he's filed a straight Medicaid expansion bill. So.
Or plans to, yeah.
No, it's dropped. It's filed.
Just code sections, but it's
that's right.
Just
to have a vehicle.
Well, that's what the Lieutenant Governor, who is allegedly aligned with Blackwell.
I know we talked a minute ago about there being momentum and this maybe moving relatively fast. Bobby, I think you can appreciate that. That may be relative. For those of us that have covered this for 13 years. The fact that we're having hearings and going over basic stuff that's been repeated time and time again, the fact that 40 other states have already done this.
It's true.
Yeah, Jeff. I'm sorry, but we were talking about the joint hearing on the economic impact to Medicaid expansion. We've been talking about that for 10 years.
And study after study. I mean, I guess last year at some point tried to do an amalgam or list of all the various studies, and I think I cut it off at 13 or 14 studies, most of them relatively
lucky 13,
showing some of the same stuff. So, I understand they've got a lot of work to do and everything, but at some points, I'm also looking at it like, guys, this is
the basics are.
I mean, do we need another hearing at this point to tell us what we've already known?
I'm sure we do. Look, they're having to educate a lot of lawmakers who this was a forbidden subject.
Right.
I don't think
That's a good point.
I don't think they were even allowed to think about it there for a little while or smile on a cloudy day.
Yeah. What I'm looking for is not any hearing, but what's going to happen, I guess, tonight when this podcast post is later on tonight, the governor's going to do his it's tonight, isn't it, Taylor? He's going to do his state of the state, and I assume he's going to stand up before the joint session of the House and Senate in the House chamber with Lieutenant Governor Hostman and Speaker White standing behind him, and reiterate that he still opposes Medicaid expansion, while you have those two individuals back standing behind him, working pretty hard to pass Medicaid expansion. So that's going to be pretty fascinating to watch.
Back to the governor and his, again, detailed opposition to this, that Obamacare sucks. Beyond that, when his campaign last year was bailing a little water because he didn't appear to have a health care plan for the hospital crisis, or
really he didn't even acknowledge that a crisis existed.
When back against the wall, when he had to come up with a plan, he expanded Medicaid payments for hospitals. Now, not for poor, sick people, but his only option was going to take more of that dirty welfare money and give it to hospitals.
And he did that by raising taxes, too.
And he raised taxes on them. Which
he could have taken that money and spent in Medicaid to provide health care to the working poor, and also help the hospital at the same time. But it became obvious then that his opposition to Medicaid expansion was not how much it cost, but the fact that he was going to have to put working people on Medicaid rolls.
And not that it was federal money, because, in other instances, I covered a press conference a while back where he was celebrating the fact we were getting a bunch of federal money, and he vowed to try and get not only Mississippi's fair share of this federal pot, but more. And again, hospitals can take this dirty Medicaid welfare money, but when it comes to,
I also feel like it's important to remind people that 138% of the federal poverty level, which is what traditional expansion would increase eligibility to, is still very little. I mean, for one person, that's about $20,000 a year.
Right,
so I think people can get caught up when they're talking about expansion, that, we're expanding Medicaid to everyone, or, people who have means like that. But that is very low income, and I just think it's good to remind people of that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Sophia, that kind of reminds me too, like we've heard a lot, like at least in one of these hearings that you covered last week, if not both of them, there's a lot of chatter about sort of some additions to some one of these bills, or maybe the final bill that would almost certainly not be taken kindly by CMS, the federal agency that administers or kind of takes the lead on helping states administer these expansion programs. Can you just talk through a couple of those?
Yeah. So on Wednesday's hearing, which was supposed to sort of outline maybe the cons of expansion or possible alternatives to expansion, it was presented that possibly something that Mississippi could do was have like limited expansion and basically cap enrollment. But Medicaid CMS currently does not allow for that. Like
straight up, like it's like
if you go to healthlaws.org, it says that is not allowed. So
you can't have a lottery system. You get healthcare.
That's right. Yeah.
Try again next year.
So I think that's also just noteworthy that, if there are real viable alternatives to expansion, totally, let's talk about them. Mm-hmm. Like I think, most people would agree on that. But currently there really is not a strong equal contender to expansion. Mm-hmm. And it's been 10 years and nobody's come up with it, right? So
that's right. Yeah. And so even the work requirements that you just mentioned a few minutes ago, that it seems like both the House and Senate Republicans are making a key part of their proposals on expansion, work requirements that would be placed on the recipients of the Medicaid benefits. Even that's questionable about whether the federal government would allow that type of restriction, right?
That's questionable, and I think it would require federal law changing, is my understanding.
Yeah, CMS back years ago, Trump administration, CMS allowed numerous work requirements. There were at least a handful.
Yeah,
those have all been rescinded except for Georgia's.
Right.
And one thing, Georgia, I believe, capped theirs at 100%. They did try and come up with a cap. What you run into is you're essentially saying we're going to keep Medicaid as it is now. Going up to 138%, that's when you cover the working poor. They make more than the poverty level. By definition, they have some sort of a job or income.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why the big question on my mind is in the House plan, well, the Senate too, but primarily the House, is I'm wondering if there is going to be some type of contingency plan in that legislation. I have no knowledge. It's just a question that's on my mind. I think it's on the speaker's mind as well. Is that I think that it's a safe bet it's safe to assume that there is going to be a work requirement in the legislation. I think the speaker's hinted at that, but I'm just wondering if there's going to be some type of contingency plan to say if CMS rejects this, then X can happen, or if they're going to choose to fight it out in court, as Georgia is doing right now. But I do think that we will have a floor vote this next week, and I think it will have work requirements in it.
I mean, like if you're Jason White or Delbert Hosemann right now, the very last thing in the world you want to do is pass a piece of legislation that you may have to like scrap and come back to the drawing board next session. You don't want to have to do this twice if you're going to do it, and that's the contingency option that you just mentioned. I mean, I think we've heard a little buzz about that. It's just kind of like a way for the whatever they do end up passing to go into effect, even if CMS rejects those work requirements or other elements that we don't even know about yet that they may try to add in, to a bill.
Right.
And it's interesting because that could make it a lot more like palatable politically for some of these on the fence Republicans to vote for if some of those restrictions are in the bill, but maybe they wouldn't vote for it or feel as comfortable voting for it if it didn't include some of that.
And they can make the argument that, well, we know CMS is not going to require this, but under the next administration, maybe CMS will allow this.
That's true.
Yeah. Bobby, what are you kind of watching out for, and what do you make of this kind of big picture? Is this this is a pretty striking moment here in the history of the legislature, huh? Yeah,
we've all been writing about this for a long time, and lots of ins and outs, and it's just fascinating from a political standpoint to me. I think the governor is in a real box. I mean, Republicans from Republican think tanks and stuff are just banging their head against the wall, saying, the governor campaigned against Medicaid expansion. He won the election, and yet here we are on the verge of perhaps expanding Medicaid. How can this be happening? And to me, I mean, the issues are so different, but the box the governor may be in is a lot like the flag.
Yeah.
In 2020, the governor campaigned and said, the legislature should not change that flag. He said he was not going to support the state flag, but when it got to the end and it was clear it was a 2/3 vote that had passed the flag in both chambers, he all of a sudden said, well, I support changing the flag. I'm going to sign the bill into law. I think it's fascinating to think what the governor may do in this particular instance, because I think, I'd be interested to hear what all y'all think, but I think when these bills get to the floor, and there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of opportunities for this to be sidetracked because the legislative process is not an easy one. There's a lot of ins and outs. But if and when these bills get to the floor, I think they're going to pass by big margins. And so then the governor's going to be kind of in a box again.
And I think the governor's going to have to think about something that I think some Mississippi Republican Party leaders forget from time to time. There are a lot of poor Republicans in Mississippi. They're not all wealthy. They're not all well over 138% of the poverty level or all country club Republicans. And we've seen in polling, this issue.
Massively popular among Mississippians.
Yeah. Everyone has a life and wants to be well and have medical care. So, I think that may have to be weighed out. Now, Governor Reeves is a lame duck as governor. I think he told all the highway patrol folks, DPS folks here recently, that he has no plans to run for another elected office. I don't know if that's set in stone or whatever. So, maybe he's not maybe he's not going to do that calculus and would still come out with a veto, but that would be a tough one. That would be a tough veto to have by your name through history.
That's right.
But I mean, I was going to say, but I believe as Bobby has written in an analysis before, I mean, some of the most significant legislation in state history has been passed by overriding a veto. So it will be interesting to see if that will happen this time.
Yeah. I think like trying to figure out about, what would happen if lawmakers do send the bill to the governor's desk. We could speculate about that. I don't disagree with anything y'all have just said. I do think that by the end of this legislative process, there's going to be, if not a 2/3 majority that passes it in both chambers, close to it. And, I think the veto would be tough. But let me just pose the question. So before we even get to that point, like, what is the opposition to this at this point in the Capitol? I mean, you've got the governor, obviously.
Obamacare sucks.
Yeah, but I mean, who is it? Like, how many people in the building are actually vehemently opposed to it at this point?
That's a good question. We did the survey last session.
Yeah, a year ago.
Well, I guess we did get in contact with all 174 House and Senate members, and there were very few who just came out and said they were opposed. Now, in fairness, most of the members said they were undecided or just didn't answer the question, but very few people just came out and said we're unopposed. I'm unopposed, and I think that that's why I think that it's going to be a big margin. I mean, I think you'll have the sort of the real conservative wing. Of course, Chris McDaniel's not in the legislature anymore, but the Chris McDaniel wing will be in opposition. But while the legislature is conservative as a whole, that particular brand of conservatism is not a big one in the Capitol.
Yeah.
I would agree. Seem like a big faction of opposition in the Capitol.
No,
right,
and the people who were opposed aren't just standing up and screaming and shouting about it either. I mean, I think they're just kind of to the point where they're just going to vote no and move on.
And it might be, they're in the same predicament we just talked about with Tate, too. Politically speaking, how do you go back to your district that has a rural hospital on the verge of closing and say, I voted no on this, even though this hospital would, stand to draw down tens of millions of dollars perhaps from this.
But Geoff, when this comes up for a vote, I'll be thinking of Chris McDaniel, and because he will be kicking himself that he's not there in the Senate to stand up and give speeches in opposition to Medicaid expansion. He kind of reveled in being able to do that.
It'll also be interesting to see. I've wondered this, how we've touched on it, but how quickly the leadership wants to move this through. I mean, this is the kind of fight that often will drag on until the very last week of the session. I get the sense that there's a little bit more urgency around this one, and like Geoff said, that's relative, of course. But it might behoove legislative leaders, if they're worried about that veto, to certainly give themselves enough time to come back and override the veto, and
there's a lot of work to be done on this still.
Right.
I mean, we're early stages with a skeleton bill in the Senate, no bill to look at yet in the House. So,
yeah, that would be ironic, Adam. What you said did happen, that they got to the very end of the session before they passed this, and the governor was able to wait until after they left for the year to veto it, and then it would be vetoed until next January. I mean, that'd be the first time they could address it. That would be a real kick in the pants.
Yeah. Sorry, Geoff. Go ahead.
Sorry. I know you guys looked that up the other day. What is that calculus? If they're still in session, they pass it. I know
they have 5 days.
5 days for him to veto it.
And if they're out of session, he has 15 days. And, of course, and I guarantee Governor Reeves if he does veto it in that scenario, he won't do like Governor Fordyce did in that 97. He vetoed the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, but then after they left for the year, but he called a special session, which one of the most mystifying things to happen, for them to come back to take up his veto, and lo and behold, they overrode his veto.
Why on earth would he do that? That's crazy.
Well,
yeah, I think one last point I'll make, and this is something that I can promise you that all of us are going to be zoned in on in the coming days, just really probably the next week or so. But like think this out. Like, say Tate vetoes or not, maybe he lets it become law without a signature, which is an option for him. But say it gets all the way through, it becomes law. The reality is this is an expansion program that would have to be administered by Tate Reeves's Division of Medicaid, which is a wild sort of aspect to this that I don't think that, Democrats in the House, when they dropped their big plan, Taylor, that you wrote about, that you broke, they did address this.
They
right?
did. I was about to mention that their proposal was to strip the division out from under the office of the governor and create a commission. Now, under their plan, the governor would still get to appoint members of that commission, but it would no longer be directly administered by the governor and the director of the division.
Yeah, this is a division, by the way, that just asked for $500 million deficit appropriation because they didn't have enough to cover that's a whole sort of, I think, quagmire of this whole situation is that even if this goes into law, what could the governor who opposes it still do, even if it passes the legislature to slow roll this or whatever? It's just a question to be asked for sure.
And if there's anyone who has spoken more against Medicaid expansion than the governor, it's his executive director of Medicaid, the division of Medicaid, Drew Snyder.
Probably a big reason Drew Snyder is in that position, frankly. But anyways, well, everybody, this has been really helpful, I think. I think it's good to come together like this. Like I said, I know that having 5 people talk to you out there at once is a little bit difficult, but this is an all-hands-deck-on situation for us at Mississippi Today. I would venture to say that certainly since in my 10 years of covering, the legislature, this is I think the biggest piece of legislation or deliberation that I've ever covered. And, I'm glad that y'all are doing it for Mississippians. I mean, it's y'all, the 4 of y'all being in that building and focused on these issues. All of these issues, but this one in particular for us is just so valuable. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for being here today and helping us break all this down. So thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That address is podcast@MississippiToday.org. Y'all can also reach out to me or any of my colleagues through social media or email. And as always, thank you for your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at MississippiToday.org/theotherside. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganucheau. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.